Turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 5. We're going to look at an episode in Jesus' life that is actually recorded by all three of the Gospels. It's not in John, but Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's there. But I want to look at the account of the man who had leprosy that Jesus healed in Luke chapter 5. We're going to read the account here in verse 12. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priests and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and he prayed. In the ancient world, leprosy was a terrible, terrible plight that anyone would have. It is an extremely destructive disease. And being covered with leprosy, this guy had no hope, no future, nothing to look forward to. So he comes to Jesus at a time where he has a great, great need within his life. It's interesting because those that had leprosy and the way that they were viewed by, it's not great. Listen to this. According to Jewish and customs, one had to keep 6 feet from a leper. So if you knew that somebody had leprosy, you had to keep within 6 feet of that person. But listen to this. If the wind blew toward a person from a leper, they had to keep 150 feet away. I don't know what the correlation is between 6 feet or if the wind blowing on you 150 feet. The only thing more defiling than leprosy and a leper was someone who had touched a dead body. Those were very, very extreme experiences that somebody would go through, and the result of having this disease, the amount of separation and the amount of grief that someone would go through because of it, it was excruciating. It was a highly contagious disease, and people thought that if you came in contact with it, you would get this disease, leprosy, and it was debilitating, and it just overtakes the victim and just totally corrupts them in a great way, to the point that they really are walking dead. And they have no quality of life whatsoever. They're banished. They're sent away. They can't spend time with anybody. They can't spend time with their family. The only people they're allowed to associate and spend time with is other lepers. But it's interesting that the people who would see that he had leprosy, they would consider that, well, the reason that we need to separate ourselves from him is not just the physical, but there is also a spiritual side to it. They believed that if you got sick, that it was due to some sin in your life. It was due to some wrongdoing. And so the rabbis and the priests and the religious people, they didn't want to have anything to do with them. We get that from John chapter 9, where his disciples come to him and they say, "Teacher, Rabbi, who sinned? Was it the child, or was it his parents that sinned that this child was born blind?" And Jesus says it's neither. We can see through the book of Job, where his friends went to him and they were like, "Okay, Job, why don't you just fess up? Why don't you tell us, what did you do wrong that God has smited you? And they believe that because of wrongdoing in his life, sin in his life, that he was going through the ailments that he was going through. So because of that, society would look at a person that had leprosy and they would deem that it was because of something they'd done in their past. And because of it, they were completely cut off. They didn't want to have anything to do with them. But nevertheless, even in the plight of what this leper had, of being alienated, of not having any time or able to spend any time with anyone, doctors were of no use, cures were not thought of. Nevertheless, this leper decides to go to Jesus in the midst of all the difficulties that he had. He had many things that could discourage him. Many things that he could have said, well, because of this or because of that, I'm not going to go to Jesus because it's just too discouraging. After all, he knew how terrible the problem was. He knew what the plight of having leprosy was and how that separated him. He knew that most everyone around him thought that there's no way that you're ever going to be healed of this. So this is going to be something that you're going to live with for the rest of your life until you die. It was just bleak at best. He also knew that there was no one who would or even could take him to Jesus. So he had to figure this out on his own. It's not like he could call up a friend, hey, can you take me to Jesus? I've heard about this guy. He had no one like that who would or even could take him to Jesus. Even more shockingly is this man, because this was early in Jesus' ministry, there was no reference for him to say, I knew that he's healed another leper, so therefore I'm also going to get that healing. He didn't have that as a reference point in any way whatsoever. It wasn't like, well, there's a glimmer of hope because I know Jesus can do this. I know that Jesus can take care of this. That was not the fact. He did not have that as a realization. He didn't even go with the fact or the realization or the hope that Jesus would heal him. He was going on, I've got to try something here. And it could have been discouraging. Well, what if Jesus says, no, I'm not going to heal you? What if he brings up something in my past? What if? And all these things could have been there. He could have been discouraged because his disciples were definitely not going to, Jesus' disciples were definitely going to not invite him. Hey, why don't you come see Jesus? That was the farthest thing from his disciples' mind. Jesus didn't give him an invitation. Said, you know what? We're having a healing service. Come on down to the river and we're going to take care of people who are sick. That wasn't the case for this man. But most likely one of the biggest things that he felt was ashamed. The shame that you would have of having leprosy. And it wasn't so much because of things that he'd done, but it was just the shame and the separation that you would feel of not being able to spend time with any other people. And so because of these many discouragement, because of these many, which could have been excuses for him not to go to Jesus, he still went. And how did he go? How did he go to Jesus? How did this man go to Jesus and say, Jesus, I need your help? The first thing he went to was he was desperate. He was extremely desperate. He had nowhere else to go. As they say, he didn't have a doctor that he'd go to. There weren't clinics. They hadn't figured out, hey, we've got a new cure for leprosy. That wasn't the case. His plight was, I'm going to die. And I'm going to die amongst a bunch of lepers, and life is not good. So he came to Jesus desperate. But he also came to Jesus very humbly. You see what he did? He comes to Jesus and he calls him Lord, but before he does that, he falls down on his face and he cries out to Jesus. He came to him humbly. He wasn't, Jesus, I've heard what you've done for other people, so therefore I need you to do that for me. But he came to him humbly and said to him, Lord, I need your help. And he came begging. We think of people that beg and, For us, a lot of the time, they're a nuisance. Let's be honest. That's how we look at them. It's like, go get a job, go figure something out, or we'll look at their situation. Well, you caused this situation. This is just consequences of the way you lived and so on and so forth. But he comes, Jesus, and he asks him a question. He says, if you're willing, will you make me clean? I find that interesting. I would have thought, as a leper, he would have said, will you make me healed? But he says, I want you to make me clean. And I think that's an important thing for us to recognize. And it's interesting because in all of the accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's not, will you make me or will you heal me, but will you make me clean? And I want us to look at a little bit of what that cleanliness looks like. Why would he say clean and not just, will you heal me? In the Old Testament, in Jewish law, leprosy was not just a disease, but also rendered a person ritually unclean. Therefore, cleansing involved both the physical removal of the disease and the ceremonial purification process to restore the leper to a state of ritual purity, allowing them to re-enter society and participate in religious life. See the difference between a cleaning and a healing? See, he could have just said to Jesus, I want you to heal me and I want you to take the leprosy away. But he was asking for something bigger. He says, yes, I want healing. I do want to be restored and I want my health to be restored back to the way it wants to be. But I also want to have restoration with my fellow people. Because he was an outcast. He was totally cut off and he wanted to have restoration with his family. He wanted to have restoration with his synagogue, with his church. He wanted to have restoration with the people he lived with. He didn't want to feel like an outcast anymore. And he says, Jesus, if you are willing, make me clean. Make me clean so that other people see that I'm clean. Make me people so that they see that I'm able to have a relationship with you and make me clean. No, this guy was an outcast. And all he wanted was to be brought back to the community. Brought back into back into society. It's interesting, he doesn't say, Jesus, if you can. There was no doubt in the leper's mind of the ability of Jesus. Because he says to Jesus, if you're willing. If you're willing to heal me. It's not whether you can, Jesus. It's not whether you have time, Jesus. It's not whether all the different, are you willing to cleanse me? Are you willing to make me whole again? This is significant because leprosy was so helpless in the ancient world that healing a leper was compared to the same as raising someone from the dead. Think of that. They considered them dead before they had actually died. And so cleansing this person would have made them become alive again, would have made them to be able to live a new life. And sadly, this guy was just as good as dead. Jesus, very thankfully, he says, I am willing. Be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. And then Jesus tells him to do something. I want you to go to the temple, and I want you to go to the priest, and I want you to tell them what's happened, and I want you to offer and do the ordinances that Moses has told you to do in order to get rid of this. so that you can be restored. So you can restore not just in health, but you can also be restored back to the community. I want to read, and it's an interesting read. If you go back to Leviticus chapter 14, and this is what Jesus is talking about. This is what Jesus tells him to do. I want you to obey the law of Moses, that you're going to have to do some sacrifices and you're going to have to go to the priest. So listen to this. The Lord said to Moses, in Leviticus 14, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, these are the regulations for any diseased person at the time of their ceremonial cleaning when they brought the priests. The priest is to go outside the camp and examine them. If they have been healed of their defiled skin disease, and that means leprosy, that's part of it. If they've been healed of their defiled skin disease, the priest shall offer that 2 live clean birds and some cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop be brought for the person to be cleansed. Then the priest shall order the one of the birds be killed over the fresh water in a clay pot. He's then to take a live bird and dip it together with the cedar wood, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop into the blood of the bird that was killed over fresh water. 7 times he shall sprinkle the blood to be cleansed of the defiled disease and then pronounce them clean. After that, he is to release a live bird in the open fields. The person to be cleansed must wash their clothes, shave off their hair, and bathe with water. Then they will be ceremonially clean. After this, they may come into the camp, but they must stay outside their tent for 7 days. On the 7th day, they must shave off their hair. They must shave their head, their beard, their eyebrows, and the rest of their hair. They must wash their clothes and bathe themselves with water, and they will be clean. On the 8th day, they must bring 2 male lambs and 1 ewe lamb a year old, each without defect, along with 3/10 of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with olive oil from a grain offering and 1 log of oil. The priest who pronounces them clean shall present both the one to be cleansed of their offerings before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then the priest is to take one of the male lambs and offer it as a gift offering, along with the log of oil. He shall wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. He is to slaughter the lamb in the sanctuary area where the sin offering and the burnt offerings are slaughtered. Like the sin offering, the guilt offerings belong to the priest who is most holy. The priest takes some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the lobe of the right ear of the one who is cleansed, on the thumb of their right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot. The priest will then take some of the log of the oil, pour it on the palm of his own left hand, dip his right forefinger into the oil of the palm, and with the finger sprinkle with it before the Lord 7 times. Bear with me here. I want you to get the whole picture here. You'll get it at the end. The priest is to put some of the oil remaining in his palm on the lobe, on the right ear, the one who is to be cleansed, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of their right foot, on top of the blood of the guilt offering. The rest of the oil in his palm, the priest shall put on the head of the one to be cleansed and make atonement for them before the Lord. Then the priest is to sacrifice the sin offering and make atonement for the one to be cleansed from their uncleanness. After that, the priest shall slaughter the burnt offering and offer it on the altar together with the grain offering and make atonement for them, and they will be clean. And then the rest of the chapter says, if we pour, this is what they're allowed to do. It's not as big an offering, but it's the whole thing: dip, 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 sprinkle, kill, sprinkle, dip, dip, sprinkle. I read that and I was like, wow, I am thankful that we have a Savior that took care of everything for us. And this is here what the Jesus tells this man to go and do. I want you to present yourself to the priest, and I want you to observe the rules and ordinances that Moses gave you concerning ceremonial cleaning to make you clean. And this man would have had to gone through a whole thing. But here's the interesting thing. This is most likely the first time a priest was ever came in contact with somebody who is healed with leprosy, because it never happened. So he's got to go through this whole jargon of things that he has to do according to the old law and the rules of Moses and offer this. And Jesus says it will be a testimony to the priest that, yes, you have been healed by someone. but I don't want you to tell anybody about it. He doesn't listen. He's too excited. He tells everybody, and everybody in the region find out about it. And then Jesus has people coming to him constantly from there on out, bringing them the sick. He would withdraw to quiet and lonely places for times of prayer, but the sick would still come to him and be taken care of. But we see a guy here who's in a hopeless state, who's got a disease that is so debilitating. He's separated from society. He's separated from everything. He's got zero hope whatsoever. But he's bold enough that he goes to Jesus and says, if you are willing. Let's go back and let's look at Jesus. In verse 13, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said. Be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him. This is one of my favorite pictures of Jesus because it shows his humanity and his love for people that far outreaches most of ours. This man who falls before Jesus, who's covered in leprosy. It's interesting because the other writers just say that he had leprosy, but Luke is the doctor and he says he's completely covered with leprosy. It wasn't like he had one little spot and it was hidden and people couldn't see it. This guy was covered with leprosy. He was a rotting corpse that was walking. And he comes to Jesus. And you know what? Jesus, he had the power and he had the authority to be able to say, hey, wait, I can't get within 6 feet of you. If it's windy, I can't get within 150 feet of you, according to the rabbis. He says, just stay there and I'll heal you. I'll give you what. No, he doesn't. He touches the man. When was the last time this man was ever touched by someone else? Was it possibly his mother? Maybe he had a wife and he got sick and had to be, I don't know. But I can guarantee you that if this man was covered with leprosy, he had had it for a long time and he had not had human contact with anybody for a long time. And Jesus reaches out and he touches him. Physically puts his hand. And I don't know what the man would have done. You touch me. You're not supposed to. Or was it that his shoulders dropped? Did he start to weep? Was he so astounded that somebody would actually touch him? And then he said, you know what, sir? I am willing. I'm willing to make you clean. I'm willing to take this terrible, terrible disease that you've lived with for such a long time. It's taken your body. It's taken your life. It's taken your family. It's taken your separation of you can't even be in society anymore. You can't worship freely. You can't work freely. You can't do anything. You're just out in a camp, left to rot and die to yourself. I am willing to make you clean. I'm not just going to heal you. I'm going to make you clean. And there's going to be restitution. There's going to be reconciliation. You know, we can look at these snapshots of Jesus all we want, and we can say, wow, isn't that great the way that Jesus... The purpose of looking at these snapshots of Jesus is to figure out how can we exemplify these? How can we make these practical in our life today? When someone who's down and out and who is unclean, who we know has a past, who doesn't live up to the standard that we think they need to in order to be accepted into our nice little group, are we willing to reach out and touch them? Are we willing to be like Jesus? And he's our example. But some of the time, that's all that some people need, is to know that you care enough to break down boundaries. And that's what Jesus did that day. He broke down a huge boundary with this man who had leprosy. Well, what if I get sick? Or what if that person rips me off? Or what if? Jesus, he could have had all kinds of different scenarios that could have gone through his head. And I'm pretty sure that some of the disciples were, oh, Jesus, don't touch that guy. You only knew that Jesus was willing and he was physical. Is that not the way that we accepted him when we decided that we were going to follow him? Hopefully, we saw that we were not clean, but then Jesus touched us and he reached out to us and he cleansed us, making reconciliation between us and God. Again, these stories, these events of Jesus' life are interesting, to say the least. Of where he will deal with somebody and will see them not in the way that his disciples saw him, didn't see them in the way that we see people all the time. But he saw them as helpless and weak and without a shepherd. And he's willing to cross those barriers. You know, Dan last week, he said, I don't know whether this is what Rob wanted me to get out of the sermon, but this is what I got. But he got out exactly what he needed to get out of it. And he asked the question, you know, I knew of a guy that had all kinds of tattoos, and so would he be welcome here? Would we wrap our arms around those people? Or do we have these expectations? Well, get your life all right, get yourself all cleaned up. No. We were given and afforded the opportunity to get our lives cleaned up and to be touched by Jesus. Everyone else has that same right and privilege, and we need to offer that exactly the same way that Jesus did. Not with expectations, not with rules, not with a checklist. Just simply, here's Jesus. He is willing and will and can make you clean.